Furthermore, 9/11 is important because right after 9/11, that's only 3 weeks after 9/11, we had the start of the war in Afghanistan. The war in Afghanistan started on October 7, 2001. Most people have forgotten that it was just a few weeks after 9/11 that this war started. And if we debate the war in Afghanistan, we can only debate it in the context of 9/11. We must try to understand what happened in 9/11. The official narrative, the surprise narrative, obviously said bin Laden carried out the attacks. He is in Afghanistan, protected by the Taliban. Therefore, it is necessary to wage war against Afghanistan. That is the official narrative. What happened in Afghanistan in the meantime is that you have a new Afghan president. It is Hamid Karzai. And that is well known, and people obviously, argue whether, that was a good thing for Afghanistan to happen. Because if you look at the person of Hamid Karzai, some people say, that's much better than the Taliban, and others say, no, that's not much better. Allegations are, and I'm not going to go into the details of the Afghan war. Allegations are that Hamid Karzai and other parts of the Afghan government are involved in the drug trade. And people sometimes ask me, why are they involved in the drug trade? And I say, well, Afghanistan is a huge producer of drugs. And the warlords that control large parts of Afghanistan, they support the government only if the government protects them, okay? So if the Afghan government tries to pick a fight with the warlords who run the drug trade, they're out of business. So Afghanistan is very complicated, and I'm not going to talk about it at length. I'm going to talk about another event that is linked to 9/11. It is the US war against Iraq. It started on March 20, 2003. Some of you might remember that right after 9/11, there were people who tried to link 9/11 to Iraq. That was wrong from the beginning. But later, in 2003, you had this link, There were quotes that, Al-Qaeda is operative in Iraq, and therefore we have to go to Iraq. We means US government. So the Iraq war is another war linked to these terrorist attacks. And what happened in Iraq really is that you have a new prime minister. Now, you have Saddam Hussein, who was removed from power. That's the main event that happened there. You have the oil resources that were distributed in a new way. And you have Nouri al-Maliki, who is now the prime minister. Obviously, here again, there are huge debates whether that is a big progress or not. But then, you need to go into the details what Maliki is doing, whether he's one of those who opens Iraq for democracy, or whether he's in that old gang of political leaders who oppress their population. What we do know is that American soldiers who fought in the Iraq war, and the Iraq war is not over, there's still American troops there, it's just they're not called combat troops anymore. So the semantics has changed. But the American troops that fight there have always rationalized their presence in Iraq with reference to 9/11. There's evidence for that. We look at helmets, in history with many different sources. And we look at the helmets of US soldiers fighting in Iraq, and they make designs on their helmets. And here you can see the Pentagon and the Twin Towers. And in 2006, there was a survey which was made in Iraq among US troops. And 85% of American soldiers said that the main mission was to retaliate for Saddam's role in the September 11 attacks. And that is really surprising, because Saddam Hussein had no role in the 9/11 attacks. So that is war propaganda. That makes your mind twisted, and it can twist your mind to such an extent that you can end up in a war where you might get killed or lose a leg just because you're not well informed. And that is really tragic. That's not a detail. Now, how did this misinformation surface? It was, first of all, this claim of weapons of mass destruction. It was Secretary of State Colin Powell who said in the United Nations Security Council in February 2003, that's 1 month before the Iraq war started, he said there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Now that was a lie, okay? And that lie really started to increase the distrust globally towards the Bush administration. When people found out that the Bush administration had lied about Iraq, they went further and said, did they lie about 9/11 as well? You know, these things are very, very closely linked. It's all about trust. Do you trust the government? Do you trust the president? Do you trust the prime minister? Or do you categorically question what they say? Colin Powell, in 2005, offered an excuse for his, lies. He said he felt terrible and apologized for having falsely presented an Iraqi weapons program that turned out not to exist. I'm the one who presented it on behalf of the United States to the world. It will always be part of my record. That is painful. So Powell is one of the very few who offered his excuses. At the same time, before the Iraq war, you had President Bush insisting on the same story. He was saying there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We must go into Iraq because otherwise Saddam Hussein will give the weapons of mass destruction to the terrorists and you will have a new 9/11 with biological or chemical weapons. And that really scared people. So that most people then said, yes, okay, then we should do this war. Because if you ask people, do you want to go into war? Most people say no. Then you ask them again, but there's a bad, bad man out there. Do you want to go to war? And they say no. You tell them, he has weapons of mass destruction. Then they say, no, I don't want to go there. I don't want to send my son. And then you ask them again, he has weapons of mass destruction, and he's going to give them to the terrorists. And somehow he was linked to 9/11, and everybody remembered that event. Then people have a strong feeling of fear. And that's politics of fear. And it really works, because then people say, I'm actually against war, but this war, I'm for it, the last one. And that's how it works. It's always been like that. Now, the source, the direct statement that Bush made before the war is, intelligence gathered by this and other governments leaves no doubt that the Iraq regime continues to possess and conceal some of the most lethal weapons ever devised. That's just before the start of the war. The danger is clear. Using chemical, biological, or one-day nuclear weapons obtained with the help of Iraq, the terrorists could fulfill their stated ambitions and kill thousands or hundreds of thousands of innocent people in our country or any other. So if you do a historical interpretation of that quote, it very clearly is a quote that instills fear, and it works. When later people found out that it was not true, what Bush had said on that day, they started to have a very, very strong distrust. They started to have a very, very strong distrust towards the whole Bush administration. So on the left you have Colin Powell, who lied at the United Nations but later excused. There you have Dick Cheney, who wrote public articles that one should use torture, which created even more distrust. Then you have George Bush, the president himself, who lied about the weapons of mass destruction, but never offered an apology. Never. Then you have Condoleezza Rice. She said there are links between Al-Qaeda and Iraq. That's nonsense. There were no such links. And then on the very right, you have Rumsfeld, and seated you have the director of the CIA, George Tenet, and Andrew Card in the back. And you know, when I talk to people, it's really this picture that matters. It's the question, do you trust these people? And some people say, yes, I trust them. I think they told me the truth about 9/11. And other people say exactly the opposite and say, these people, that's the mafia. I don't trust them at all. They lied to me, and they started wars. And as a historian, I'm in between, okay? I listen to people, what they say, and I try to find facts about all the events that have been happening during the last 10 years.